He went out to celebrate the 4th of July with friends. 3 weeks later, his family still doesn't have a cause of death. And every new detail that surfaces seems to raise more questions than it answers. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit subscribe, and if this case matters to you, share it. Families like this one need the pressure to stay on until they get real answers. Let's start with who Nolan Wells actually was, because that part tends to get lost in a case like this. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He was a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, gearing up to return for football season. By every account from the people who knew him, he was well-liked, close with his teammates, and close with his mother, Christine Wansley. On the 4th of July, Nolan traveled by boat to Horn Island with a group of friends. Horn Island is a remote, uninhabited barrier island off the Mississippi coast, part of a national seashore, reachable only by water. On a holiday like the 4th, it fills up with boats and holiday crowds. That's where Nolan spent his last confirmed hours. Here's the timeline as it's been publicly reported. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, Nolan was last confirmed seen on the island. According to Ashley Cole, a local judge whose son Warren was part of the friend group, her son spoke with Nolan around that time, and Nolan indicated he'd get a boat home later with a different group of friends. Separately, some of his friends have said Nolan chose to stay behind because he was talking with a young woman he'd met that day. That young woman has since been identified in multiple outlets as 19-year-old Katie McCormick. According to McCormick's older sister, Gracie, Katie was on the island with her own group of friends, and the two of them did talk. But Gracie disputes the idea that Nolan intentionally stayed behind for her. She said Katie believed Nolan was getting ready to board the boat he'd arrived on, not planning to remain on the island. McCormick later left Horn Island with her brother and his fiancée. She has said very little publicly since, though she did respond once to online speculation about her, writing that she was praying for Nolan's family and asking people to focus on supporting them rather than speculating about her. Ben Crump, the attorney representing Nolan's family, has pointed directly at this contradiction. One account says Nolan stayed behind by choice. The other says he was getting ready to leave with everyone else. Both versions can't be fully true at the same time, and nobody in an official capacity has resolved which one is accurate. Around 4:30 that afternoon, according to public statements from the friend group, the primary boat began taking on water because of an issue with the bilge pump. The group left the island without Nolan, apparently expecting him to return separately with someone else. He never did. That night, Nolan's mother got a call from his friends telling her he hadn't come back. She reported him missing. A search operation involving multiple local and state agencies launched the following morning, July 5th, covering the island and the surrounding water. On the morning of July 6th, a National Park Service ranger discovered a body along the shoreline at the northwestern tip of Horn Island, floating face down in the water. The Jackson County coroner confirmed through dental records that it was Nolan. At that point, Sheriff John Ledbetter said investigators did not initially suspect foul play, and Mississippi officials described the death as an apparent drowning. Nolan's family did not accept that as the full story, and neither did a lot of people watching from outside it. Beyond the conflicting accounts of his final hour, the family has pointed to a number of other things that didn't sit right with them. Christine Wansley has said that police reports listed Nolan as wearing black shorts when he disappeared. But she says a young woman who'd been on the island reached out to her afterward with photos from that day showing Nolan in blue shorts, not black. The family has also described what they call suspicious encounters with some of Nolan's friends when they tried to retrieve the keys to his car, which had been left in one friend's driveway. They say they ultimately had to track down his phone themselves, with help from a phone monitoring app and a family friend. That same family friend reportedly noticed that Nolan's Snapchat, which he updated regularly, showed no activity for the 24 hours leading up to his disappearance, and that the account's location data didn't match where his phone was eventually found. None of those details have been independently confirmed by investigators in an official statement. They are the family's own account, shared through interviews and their legal team. But they're a significant part of why the family has pushed so hard for outside scrutiny of a case local officials initially treated as a drowning. On July 10th, Nolan's parents, joined by attorney Ben Crump and civil rights leader Reverend Al Sharpton, held a press conference calling for full transparency in the investigation. They announced they'd be commissioning an independent autopsy, separate from the official one being conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. It's worth naming directly why this case pulled in the kind of national attention it did, because it's been part of the story from the beginning. Nolan was the only black member of the friend group on that boat trip, in a state with a long and difficult racial history, and that context is inseparable from why so many people outside Mississippi started paying close attention. Sports commentator Stephen A. Smith spoke publicly about the case, saying the black community had reason to be suspicious given the circumstances. That's a piece of the public conversation, not a finding of fact. Nobody, including Smith, has claimed to know what happened to Nolan on that island. On July 15th, Nolan's family and their legal team met with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath. Following that meeting, Crump said the district attorney had committed to presenting the full investigation to a grand jury once it was complete. Hundreds of people attended Nolan's funeral in Ocean Springs. Crump and Sharpton used the service to renew their calls for accountability. Tyler Perry paid for the funeral. Sharpton announced a reward fund, initially $100,000, for information leading to answers, with Perry covering half of it. Since then, additional public figures, including Colin Kaepernick, have contributed, and the reward has grown to $125,000. The day after the funeral, preliminary results from the independent autopsy were released. The independent pathologist described Nolan's cause and manner of death as undetermined, pending further investigation. The report noted red discoloration at the back of the head and neck, discoloration that the pathologist said could reflect either normal decompositional changes or blunt force injury, with no way to distinguish between the two from what was available. The report also noted that certain neck structures had already been removed during the original state autopsy before the independent pathologist ever examined the body, which limited what conclusions could be drawn. Because of that missing tissue, the pathologist said he could not rule out injury to the neck as a contributing factor or cause of death. That is different from saying he found evidence that Nolan was strangled or injured. It's a statement about the limits of what the independent exam could determine, not a finding of harm. The official autopsy from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office has still not been made public. Toxicology results from both the state and the independent examination remain pending as well. As of the most recent reporting, investigators have interviewed roughly 60 witnesses in the effort to reconstruct Nolan's final hours. Some independent voices looking at the case, including a former FBI agent who reviewed surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and the water conditions around the island that day, have said the evidence they've seen points toward a tragic accident rather than foul play, while also cautioning that more details could still emerge that change that picture. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has said publicly that it will keep evidence out of view until the case goes before a grand jury. Officials have described that as a decision made to protect the integrity of the investigation and the eventual grand jury process, not an attempt to keep the public in the dark. There's also been reporting that the FBI has been asked to look into threats made against witnesses and officials connected to the case, a reflection of just how much attention and pressure this investigation has drawn as it's played out largely online. So here's where the case actually stands, separate from every theory attached to it. No official cause of death has been released. No charges have been filed. No one has been named a suspect by any law enforcement agency. What exists, confirmed and on the record, is this: an 18-year-old who was last seen alive around 3 in the afternoon, a boat that left the island without him around 4:30, a body found 2 days later at the northwestern tip of the same island, 2 conflicting accounts of why he stayed behind that have never been publicly reconciled, a family that has raised specific, still unresolved concerns about his shorts, his car keys, his phone, and his Snapchat activity, and an independent autopsy that couldn't rule out injury to the neck simply because it never had the tissue to examine. That's the gap this case is sitting in right now. Not proof of anything. Not an accusation against anyone. Just a set of real documented questions that a grand jury is going to have to sit with, using evidence the public doesn't have access to yet. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. A teammate. A son who was, by every account, deeply loved. Someone who went out on a boat to celebrate a holiday with people he trusted, and never made it home. If you want to know the moment there's real movement in this case, An autopsy release, a grand jury decision, anything confirmed. Subscribe, and I'll bring it to you the moment it's real.